online and on DAB. Saturday Breakfast with Penny Smith.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
9:15 is the time. The government is planning new rules to make it easier for trans people to self-identify their gender. Tara Hewitt is transgender activist, she's diversity consultant and co-founder of Trans Equality Legal Initiative. Good morning to you, Tara.
Hi, Penny.
Hi. Explain what this means.
I think really simply it's just looking at a piece of legislation that was put in place over a decade ago to just make more sense, fit with the population the way we are, making sure that it's not a group of judges deciding on people's gender and that actually people's identity is left to ourselves, which is what the rest of our lives, if you think about your sexual orientation and your ethnicity, we don't go and get a group of judges to decide on that. So the review's just really looking at that process and trying to make it a lot easier.
Now, when you say judges, it was doctors as well got involved in this, didn't they?
A panel, so the gender recognition panel that sits to determine whether someone will be approved with a gender recognition certificate, up until very recently was totally anonymous. So we didn't know who sat on those panels, other than the fact that there would be a doctor and some judges. And you'd need some medical documentation from a consultant, which was on an approved list, as part of your submission to that panel before they'd approve that you'd be entitled to change your gender in terms of a new birth certificate.
You see, the thing is, there might be lots of people who say, well, what does it matter what you are? But I suppose that it does have a huge bearing. For example, if you end up going to prison, for example.
I'd say, yeah, one thing I'd be really cautious about is that this is only one of 35 recommendations that was made by the Trans Equality Inquiry that the Women and Equality Select Committee put in place. And I'd say this is it's a really important change, but actually in terms of how it will impact on trans people's lives, the main areas is around if you're sent to prison, around pensions, and around what's recorded on your marriage documentation if you get married, because the Equality Act applies in most parts of life, and that's one of the reasons why many people have never got a gender recognition certificate, because the process was so difficult and so unfair to have to sit or send documentation to these judges, that because it doesn't have that big impact on your day-to-day life, that people just haven't actually gone through that process, so it's been failing. But you're right, if you get sent to prison, it makes the process a lot easier in terms of the way that the rules are at the moment.
And I know that I went to the Barbican earlier this year, and at that stage they had transgender loos. They decided that you could go into the women's loos, which were the worst thing is that the queues there are always so huge, it just made them even huger, so that people thought, what on earth is going on here?
I'd say from a toilet's point of view, this doesn't touch on that at all, really. I always hate this idea we have gender-neutral toilets and toilets. I just love the idea we have toilets. I have a toilet at home. When I've advised organisations, it increases your capacity of your toilets if you just have toilets that are rooms. Nobody likes sharing cubicles and wondering whether the doors are going to lock on these little flimsy cubicles that you go into. If you look at all the nice new coffee shops that we have places, normally it's a room that has walls, that has a sink in it, and that's often the best place if you're designing new toilets in places, and just call it a toilet rather than having to gender everything, and it makes life easier for everybody.
Yeah, and it might make some people a bit cleaner and tidier if they think that there might be somebody outside waiting to go in who's of the opposite sex or transgender or whatever.
I think it makes people less worried about, I've got to rush in and rush out. If you've got a room, it just gives you that more space. I think, as I said, going back to, in this country, we've got this strange, we like communal spaces. We have communal changing rooms where nobody really likes getting naked with each other. We have these toilets where there's these little wooden walls between each other that sometimes aren't high enough as you want. And I just love the idea of us actually creating spaces that are just better and
nicer things to go to. There has been, each time that this has come into the news, there has been the suggestion that, for example, a male peeping Tom could use this to gain access to women's changing rooms.
What I'd say firstly, the change that's been announced was announced last year in July in response to the Trans Equality Inquiry, so it's not a new announcement. And the announcement actually has no bearing in relation to toilets. So there is no law in the UK that actually defines who can go into toilets. There isn't anything that actually defines that. If you deny somebody access to a toilet, it's a breach of the Equality Act. So the change that we're talking about in relation to the Gender Recognition Act, it's a sort of a different debate. That isn't what this is. But for the point of discussion, I think that what's interesting is if you're a sex offender, you're not banned from being able to use toilets. You wouldn't know if someone was a sex offender. But we're talking about a group of people, like myself, that are being tarred with, oh, you potentially could be a threat, is often what the implication is. But yeah,
no, I suppose no. What they're saying is that this is a peeping Tom's charter. Here I am. I myself am transgender. Not me.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that they could say I'm transgender, therefore I can go into these women's changing rooms.
But I'd say that sex offenders of any gender can go into changing rooms, and you wouldn't know that they were a sex offender. So we've got sex offenders who prey on people of the same gender. So I think it's sort of a misnomer to be using that, and most of the evidence has shown that there's very little, if any, examples of that where that's been proved to be the case, where actually any of the Equality Act being used to defend somebody being able to do that. There isn't any examples that I know of that being able to be shown. But this change in law will have no basis bearing on that. It's something totally different. That's already in the UK. You can already go into a changing room that identifies as your gender. From the minute you start living permanently in that gender, it's got nothing to do with the gender recognition.
Meanwhile, over in America, President Trump has suddenly decided to ban transgender personnel from serving in the military.
I'd say it's surprising, but I think with Trump, I think we've all got past surprising with these tweets at the moment. I think what's scary is it's an extension of the example of these policies like the Muslim ban. So when you have governments that the Muslim travel ban, when you have governments that start to bring in policies that actively target groups within society, that's where it gets scary. We can all have a debate and a discussion whether governments are moving fast enough to reduce inequalities or whether laws impact more on one community or another, and I'll be very vocal in those debates. But I think what is very dangerous is when you have the leader of one of the world's biggest and most powerful countries saying actually these communities deserve less rights. And that he's done that with the Muslim community, he said that about Mexicans coming to America, and he's the same with LGBT rights. And I think people need to start standing up, whether you're LGBT or not, and actually us challenging that. And we've seen our government say that we're proud of our LGBT personnel, but I want them to go further and us to actually say our relationship with America, we need to use that to challenge Trump's policies and say that that's not acceptable to us as your ally, that we want you to be thinking about that, and I haven't seen Theresa May come out on that.
How has your life been in the last 10, 15 years, for example?
I think things have changed. I think that we have definitely got more awareness of the issues that people experience. I mean, my goes back to worst points in my life where I was at uni about 10 years ago, where I tried to hang myself because I thought the future was so bleak, to where I am now, where I'm working to make the health service and other organisations as part of my work more inclusive for everybody. And I think that we've got a government looking at reviewing the Gender Recognition Act. We've had the review into trans rights last year by the Women Equality Select Committee, so we're seeing progress. But I think you still got such vast inequalities here in the UK that progress, I still think, needs to be faster. I still get discrimination online, I still get abuse.
How do you get discrimination online? Sorry to interrupt you there, but how do you get discrimination?
So I think if you speak on abuse, I think if you speak to any trans person that's got a level of public profile, whether it's Fox Fisher after they went on Good Morning Britain, whether it's Paris Lees, anybody who's done anything that anywhere in the media, you end up with people targeting you and just sending you transphobic abuse, telling you that you're a freak. I'm sure that happens within politicians saying that they've been getting that abuse. But I think when it's about your identity and you've fought so hard just to be able to live as you, that still impacts on you. It doesn't matter how resilient you are, that does impact on people. And it also puts people off going for jobs and actually wanting to be successful or wanting to put themselves out there because they see the backlash that other people are getting. So I do think we need to do more to challenge the discrimination that we see other people doing, whether not just leaving it to trans people to say, Tara, you challenge that back. Actually, other people need to be challenged in that too.
Thank you very much. Tara Hewitt, there, transgender activist, diversity consultant and co-founder of Trans Equality Legal initiative. The time is 26 minutes